This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the best all-in-one platform for any of your website building needs. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today we're gonna talk about art fixing. It's something that has honestly been talked to death at this point, probably in large part because despite the fact that it's so widely hated, it's still constantly happening, and with more frequency, aggression, and relentlessness than ever. But it's because the issue has been talked to death that I've never made a video about it before. There are a million others out there, and I didn't feel like I had anything to say about it that they hadn't already said. And I also thought that because everyone was talking about it, the trend of art fixing would eventually die down as more awareness and attention was brought to why it was bad. I thought that the more people knew about it, the less people would do it. Thought. Past tense, because then I deep dived into TikTok to analyze the art community there for a recent video linked in the iCard above, and realized that this isn't a problem that's getting better with time like I had expected it to. It's getting even worse and more normalized than before, which was astounding to me. Like, people have long since established that fixing art is bad, and there's no shortage of people talking about why. And yet, rather than dying down, it's become more prolific and popular than it's ever been. So while I will quickly go over what art fixing is and why it's bad, the reason I'm making this video is not to be the millionth person to say fixing art is bad, but rather to examine why it's still happening so often, why people still feel justified doing it, and whether or not any of their reasons for feeling that way are actually valid and justifiable. Is fixing someone else's art ever okay? Today we're gonna go over the most prominent and common reasons that people think so, and try to objectively analyze whether or not they're right. But before we do, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, Squarespace. I've said in many videos before that the most important thing for a professional artist to have is a portfolio that's clean, organized, and appealing to look at. And it's true. It's what makes a client decide whether or not they want to work with you. And the easiest way to make sure your portfolio website is professional and accessible is to build it with Squarespace, a website building and hosting tool that I've personally been using to run my art studio for several months now, long before they actually reached out to me. Their gallery features are so versatile that you can organize your art exactly how you want it, and their automatic image scaling means that the dimensions of what you upload doesn't matter. It'll display it perfectly right away, which is a godsend when it comes to saving you time during portfolio building. And even better, Squarespace has e-commerce integration, so if you wanted, you could make an all-in-one portfolio and store website, with not just your art displayed for clients to see, but the stuff you're selling it on being sold right there too. No matter what your needs are, their tools and templates will make bringing your vision to life easy and straightforward, which means one less barrier between you and sharing your art with the world. Anyway, thank you so much to Squarespace for sponsoring this video, and please go check out squarespace.com to get a free trial to build your own website, because no matter what your site needs are, they have a template for you. And once you've built it, go to squarespace.com/touchofcelestia to save 10% on your first website or domain purchase. Now, all that aside, let's get into the video. At this point, I'm sure most of you already know what art fixing is and why it's widely regarded as pretty much the worst in every way. But I'm sure there are also still a handful of you that don't. So I'm quickly gonna explain the basics of the trend and the backlash that it rightfully faces. Art fixing is the practice of taking a piece of someone else's art and redrawing some aspect of it with the intention of correcting a mistake or problem that was present in the original piece, according to the one correcting it anyway, and then usually posting it publicly on social media. The mistake or problem that the art fixer is correcting could be a wide range of things, but the most frequent examples are either technical issues or social justice issues. As far as technical issues go, you'll most often see people fixing either anatomical errors or stylistic choices that the original artist made that the fixer found ugly or unappealing. In terms of social justice issues, there are a lot of possible motivations for an art fixer. The original piece lightened the character's canon skin tone, otherwise known as whitewashing. The original piece depicted a character as thinner or more societally attractive than they are in canon. Or the original piece depicted a character with traits that the fixer deems unacceptable. And unacceptable can mean a few things. One, that they looked at the art and thought it was wrong and in need of fixing because it doesn't provide adequate representation. Usually that they drew the character white and thin, and the fixer believed that the character should be of a different race or have a different body type. Or reason number two, they looked at art of a non-white character and based on some disgusting ass racist beliefs decided that they needed to be fixed and made white. As you can see, there are a variety of different reasons based on those examples alone that might motivate someone to quote unquote fix someone's art, ranging from genuinely well-intentioned critique to racist harassment and bullying. We've seen all of them time and time again within the art community, from Z-Fix's art to the Croquette style correction to the Genshin Impact Sumeru character designs to the HBO Scooby-Doo fan art debacle, and that's only the tip of the iceberg. But the bottom line that most people realize and understand is that no matter what the reasons are for fixing art, the end result isn't productive. Best case scenario, the fixer is genuinely trying to help the artist whose work they're fixing, but the way that they've gone about trying to help has actually hurt the artist in question by effectively publicly shaming them instead. Worst case scenario, the art fixing was a deliberately malicious attempt to either bully an artist whose work they don't like or target and attack a minority that they don't want to see represented in art. So either way, the practice is either at best misguided and hurtful, and at worst, hateful and vitriolic. And if the best case scenario is bad, there is no justification for continuing to do the thing. And yet it continues. We're still seeing it over and over again with no signs of stopping. ZFix's art was recently discovered to have been continuing their art fixing crusade on Facebook until late last year. And the Scooby-Doo incident happened even more recently, despite art fixing being something that's been publicly denounced for ages now. For context, the Scooby-Doo situation is essentially that recently HBO announced a new show that reimagines the Scooby-Doo gang, and several of the characters in that gang are no longer white. This sparked its own share of controversy, but the relevant point to this is that the HBO show depicts Shaggy, Velma, and Daphne as people of color. An artist who, seeing the resurgence of Scooby-Doo popularity, decided to draw fan art based on the original series and depicted the whole cast as white, and they explicitly stated based on the original series and depicted the whole cast as white, and they explicitly stated that it had nothing to do with the new HBO show and was only based on the original franchise. Another artist then decided to correct this fan art by changing the races of Shaggy, Velma, and Daphne to reflect the new HBO version's designs, as you can see here. For a more detailed look into the situation, I'll link Mohammed Agbadi's video in the iCard above and the description, but the point is that the art fixer saw some completely harmless fan art that was deliberately and clearly not intended to reflect the HBO show's redesigns and decided to say, I need to make this right. I'll draw over their work and publicly shame them. It's my only choice. And this happened recently, after art fixing has been widely and almost universally criticized for years. It's only one of many examples of it too, so why? Why are people still so relentlessly committing to this trend of correcting the work of other artists, even after it's been made abundantly clear that it's more harmful than it is helpful? Is it because they genuinely think they're doing the right thing? Because they're pandering to what they think left-wing audiences want to see? Because they're being deliberately malicious? Or because they're just trolling and trying to start drama where drama does not need to be? And just as pressingly, are they ever right? Is there ever a good, justifiable, valid reason to fix someone else's art? Well, I think it depends entirely on their reasons for doing so. So we're gonna examine all of those primary reasons individually to look for some answers. Let's start with the most obvious and easy example because it's the fastest, and more importantly, I want my stance on it to be clear right off the bat. If a person's reason for quote-unquote fixing someone's art is to erase a feature of the character that they don't like because of their own bias and hate, they're an asshole. Simple as that. You see a character drawn as fat and you fix them to be thin? Asshole. You see a character drawn with scars, arm and leg hair, or other societally unattractive traits and decide to redraw that art to get rid of them? Asshole. You see a character drawn as a non-white race and decide to fix that art by making them white? The biggest asshole. These people are driven by hate, and the only reason they're doing what they're doing is to attack the groups they look down on. There is no justification for what they do, and whether they're trolls that are only interested in generating discourse or just genuinely irredeemably hateful, it makes no difference. Either way, their art fixes should be ignored and disregarded as the unproductive, disgusting demonstrations of cruelty that they are, or even reported if they're spreading hate and subsequently violating the rules of the platform that they're posted on. But what about the opposite reason? What if someone is fixing art to provide representation for minorities rather than erase it out of hate? This is where it starts getting complicated, because both their motivation for doing it and whether or not they have any right to is heavily dependent on the situation. For example, ZFix's art, if you're somehow unfamiliar with their whole shit show in the year 2022, was an artist that aggressively and relentlessly took the character designs of popular media and fixed them by making them darker skinned, overweight, and hairy. This wasn't done with the intention of race bending a character for fan art or even redesigning them for representation's sake. It was done with the explicitly stated purpose of fixing the original design because they thought it was wrong. In fairness, it's widely believed that Z was actually just a troll trying to stir up drama within the art community, a theory that Thuman explores more in the video linked in the iCard above, but for the sake of this examination, we're gonna assume they were serious. I don't think they were, to be honest, but that's not the point, because it still stands as an example of how the reverse of whitewashing in terms of art fixing can be harmful too, or at least unproductive. Because in this case, the only reason that I can see that person having for doing it, if they're not legitimately seeking representation, would be to be hateful. And it should go without saying that that means there's really no good reason or justification for it to be done. done. But like I said, it gets more complicated when we consider other potential situations. Like if what the art fixer is trying to accomplish is legitimately to just get more representation for visual minorities in media. For example, the recent Genshin Impact controversy. Genshin Impact is a game with a very extensive cast of characters, and most of them are either white or very pale. So when they announced that they were adding a nation in the game that's based on the Middle East and some parts of South Asia, a lot of the fandom assumed that that meant more darker skinned characters would be added, which was something people were very rightfully looking forward to. That didn't happen. Instead, they released a bunch more light-skinned characters, and as a result, they were met with a lot of backlash. I'll link a video in the iCard above that goes over the whole issue in more detail, but my point in bringing it up is that the backlash prompted some artists to fix the character designs that Genshin released by making them darker skinned, and that's a prime example of the more complex side of art fixing that I'm referring to here. Because on a very basic level, I can understand what motivated them to do that. Whether they handled it right or not, they saw a lack of diverse representation in a thing they liked, and their primary goal was to just get that representation one way or the other. To really play devil's advocate, they may even have thought that fixing those designs could be legitimately productive. That if their fixes got enough traction and attention on social media, Hoyoverse would actually change the designs to reflect that feedback, or would at least consider it more going forward for their future characters. It's much harder to thoroughly denounce art fixers with that mentality, because it's entirely possible that their reasons are completely well-intentioned, and they might even believe that what they're doing could spark positive change. So does that make it okay? Is this an instance where art fixing is actually justifiable? In my opinion, no. I'm sympathetic towards these art fixers and understanding of their motivations, but I personally believe that regardless of their intentions, fixing the art or character designs of popular media to force representation where there is none doesn't actually help provide positive representation at all, and really only has a negative impact even if that's not what they intend. To be clear, I'm not saying I think race bending a character isn't okay. At least in my opinion, drawing an existing character as a different race is harmless and fun even, and probably can help minorities feel more represented in media if they see or create fan art of characters looking like them. Like, look at Blacktober. It's a whole month devoted to art of black characters, and a lot of that means reimagining existing characters as black in the process. It's a really cool celebration of black people and characters, and although it faces its own share of backlash, I think it's a great example of race bending being used as a positive, uplifting practice within the art community. For more nuance and detail into Blacktober specifically, I'll send you to Fiona Paulo's video in the iCard above, because she did an amazing job examining and explaining all sides of the controversy surrounding it. But I'm bringing it up now because I want to make it abundantly clear that I'm not saying race bending in art, as fan art of existing media and characters, is bad or not okay. What I'm very specifically referring to is not when an artist draws their interpretation of an existing character as another race, but rather when an artist redraws or edits another artist's work of that character to fix them to be another race for the sake of representation. Because even if their intention is purely positive, they're still defacing another artist's work without their permission. And what is it really accomplishing beyond that? Making a point? Trying to hurt or shame the original artist? Convincing the original artist to change that character's design themselves? Going back to the Genshin example, it would have been entirely possible to just verbally protest the lack of racial diversity in the game if the goal was to get Hoyoverse to make changes, and that would have been completely fair and reasonable. But fixing their character designs isn't going to persuade them any more than a verbal protest would, nor would the fixed version suddenly become official or offer some kind of real positive representation in and of itself. It only serves to make people angry and disrespect the original artist, who probably had little to no say in what the character looked like anyway. If representation is lacking, forcing it by fixing existing characters to be more diverse isn't actually going to result in more representation, because it's not going to make that change canon or convince the original creators of the character to change them. And trying to convince them to do so in such an aggressive, disrespectful manner might actually do more harm than good, rather than trying to constructively explain to them why including more racially diverse characters is so important. It's also something that brings up another important factor to consider: the difference between fixing the art of a huge team or company and fixing the art of an individual artist. A lot of people feel that if the art fixer is fixing the art of a company, it's much less harmful, but if they're fixing the art of an individual artist, it's unacceptable. And to an extent, I can understand this. The company and its art team probably won't be directly hurt by an art fix that you post on Twitter of their character design, and there's also no individual artist being attacked by it. The whole team is being criticized by way of the fix existing, not just one person. They also arguably have more obligation to actually provide representation throughout their content than an individual creator would, based on their ability to reach much wider audiences and potentially make real change in the way that minorities are represented in media, which reasonably opens them up to more scrutiny when they fail to do so. And I can understand art fixers feeling, as a result, that fixing the art of these companies is harmless. But number one, you never know if the actual artist that did work on the piece being fixed as part of that company is seeing this and being hurt by it, because it's entirely possible that they are. And number two, even if fixing the art of a company rather than an individual is completely harmless, does that mean it's helpful? Again, to me, that's what it all comes down to. Art fixing doesn't create positive representation or convince companies to make more diverse characters, at least not any more so than a more constructive, less disrespectful method would. So even if it's harmless, it's not helpful either. So what is it accomplishing beyond normalizing a harmful trend? I think it's also important to mention on that note in particular that there's a very big difference between making a fan redesign of a character and fixing the original design. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with redesigning your own alternate version of an existing character and sharing that design, so long as it's done respectfully. It can be a really cool practice that will help you develop your character design skills and even show appreciation of the original character and piece of media. And that is not something that I mean to criticize in the slightest, although that is somewhere where I think that the distinction between company and individual is important again, because redesigning a character from popular media is very different from redesigning an artist's OC without their permission, which is a lot more questionable. Anyway, my point is that redesigning a character is entirely different than taking the art done for their original design and altering it, claiming that altered version to be fixed. The implication of there being something wrong with the original design is what makes that so toxic and harmful rather than transformative and fun, which is something I'll go into more detail about later on. Finally, what about in cases where the character's canon design isn't being fixed, but rather someone's fan art of that character? It's not the original artist's failure to provide adequate representation that motivates this art fixing. It's the fan artist's failure to depict the character as they are in canon. For example, if an artist clearly and deliberately whitewashes a canonically POC character in their work, would it then be justifiable to fix their fan art of that character by altering the skin tone to be accurate? Well, I think this is hands down the most understandable reason, it still brings me back to the same question. Does fixing that art make positive change? If you think the artist is open-minded enough to change, would it not be more productive to just tell them why whitewashing is wrong rather than publicly shaming them so that they can understand their mistake and learn to not make it again? And if you think the artist is just irredeemably intentionally racist and not willing to change, is bringing more attention to their work by fixing it just to attack them actually helping if you know that it won't make them stop whitewashing? Personally, I think there are more constructive solutions in either scenario than fixing the artist's work, and therefore I personally believe that this still isn't okay even in this instance, despite the fact that I understand and sympathize with the hypothetical art fixer's motivation. So in terms of all of these morality-based reasons for fixing art, are any of them valid and justifiable? Well, honestly, yeah, I think some of them are, but them being valid as reasons, as the things that motivate the art fixers to do what they do, still doesn't make the act of fixing someone's art valid. I think a lot of these reasons are fundamentally well-intentioned, but I can't think of one instance where the issue that they're trying to address with the art fixing couldn't be more constructively addressed by less malicious means. And if it can be addressed by hurting the artist less, then I personally believe that it should be. That's just the social justice side of things though. We're a million years into this video and we still haven't looked at the technical side of art fixing, so let's do that now. By technical, I mean art fixers that aren't taking issue with the actual content of the artist's work, but the work itself. They don't care that you drew sexy Sonic the Hedgehog, they care that you drew his nose too big, and they're gonna draw over your work to correct it. And just like before, there are a wide variety of reasons that an art fixer might think it acceptable or even pertinent to do this. And just like before, they're pretty evenly divided between well-intentioned but misguided and deliberately malicious and hateful. So let's start with the deliberately malicious and hateful side because it's faster and much more straightforward. In my recent video discussing the art community on TikTok, I explained that for a multitude of reasons, the bullying and harassment of young beginner artists for drawing badly has become increasingly commonplace there. And it's for that reason that malicious art fixing is so prevalent in that community. It's a good example of art being fixed, not to help the artist grow, but to mock them for not being good enough in the first place. And there are ultimately no valid or acceptable reasons to do that. I'm not sure why TikTok in particular is home to quite so much more art fixing than any other platform I've seen, but I suspect that it has something to do with the huge focus on thoughtlessly following trends, and the fact that because it's short-form video content, it's really easy to actually show the process of fixing the art and drag out the mocking process as a result. Regardless, the reasons these art fixers have for doing what they're doing are usually pretty simple. They think it's funny and either don't know or don't care how harmful it is, they think it'll get them followers, or they're so insecure about their own art that they'd rather make themselves feel better by tearing down someone else's. Sometimes it's a combination of all three, but none of them are even vaguely constructive or well-intentioned, so they're pretty easily written off as assholes that need to grow up and stop weaponizing the trend of art fixing to insult and bully other artists in the community. And unfortunately, the vast majority of art fixers do fall into this category of asshole. But there are cases where the art fixer genuinely does want to help the artist whose work they're fixing, and that's where this gets complicated, because it can help that artist. Redlining, for example, is when an artist draws over mistakes in another artist's piece with the correct way to draw the things that they drew wrong, and it's an incredibly useful practice that many artists utilize in their studies and benefit heavily from. Having someone fix your art in a way that shows you your mistakes and how to correct them is exceptionally valuable, which is why channels like Sam Does Arts and Ethan Becker are so successful, because they fix their viewers' submitted art in a way that shows them how to improve, and it works. The difference is that their viewers do submit that art and volunteer to have their art fixed, whereas the vast majority of artists who have their work fixed online do not. They just have someone draw over their work and post it publicly without their consent, which not only effectively shames them, but doesn't even constructively explain why the fixes were necessary in the first place, which they need to know in order to grow and fix them. It comes down to the wider issue of unsolicited critique, a topic that I've touched on multiple times before on this channel, and am planning a specific dedicated video on, because it's complicated. As I've said before, to summarize, in my opinion, even the most well-intentioned unsolicited critique is still something you should avoid, because best case scenario, the artist does learn something valuable from it and it improves their art, but it does so at the expense of their self-esteem, because them not looking for critique and receiving it anyway probably made them feel pretty shitty. And worst case scenario, the artist wasn't looking to improve in the first place or was too insecure and sensitive to be able to handle critique, and you offering it anyway just made them feel terrible or even stop them from drawing altogether. As far as I'm concerned, it's always best to ask an artist if they're open to critique if you're adamant about giving it, and respect their answer if they say no. And the same goes for art fixing. Even the most well-intentioned art fixing that is exclusively done with the intention of helping the original artist is still running the risk of hurting them deeply in the process. And even if it does teach them how to improve something about their art, it's nothing they couldn't have learned by you approaching them privately and teaching them directly, rather than posting publicly and inadvertently shaming them in front of others. Just like every other instance of art fixing we've talked about today, the end result that the art fixer is seeking could be achieved in a way that hurts the original artist less. So if the intent really is to help them, use the other way. Art fixing without consent is never the best, most constructive way to help another artist, and it usually does more harm than good. I'd also like to mention here that there's a very thin line between correcting an artist's mistake and erasing their deliberate stylistic choice. It's a thin line because it's a nuanced topic in and of itself. When is it an art style and when is it technically incorrect? When does art style become an excuse for drawing something wrong because you don't know how to draw it right? It's something I'm going to discuss more in its own video, but in this context, I want to talk about the ways it's deeply embedded in art fixing, because the line between a stylistic choice and an actual mistake is so thin, art fixers frequently fail to walk it right. The so-called corrections they make on the artist's work are often just changing their style to be more realistic, when the original piece was never made to be realistic in the first place, and subsequently doesn't benefit at all from the revisions. In this case, most art fixers tend to fall into the first category of just an asshole, because they find the artist's style ugly or unappealing and decide to fix it to what is usually semi-realism. But there are some instances of the fixer actually wanting to help and not realizing that they mistook a stylistic choice for a technical mistake. This is especially true given that a lot of the artists that are out here fixing art aren't actually that technically skilled themselves. Regardless, either way, defaulting to fixing it as a response is not the way to go. So all of that said, those are the most common reasons I've found that art fixers use to justify their actions, and after analyzing them more closely, I think I can understand better why this trend isn't going away. There isn't just one reason that a person might think it's okay to do, and honestly, a lot of the more nuanced reasons actually seem very fair and understandable to me. And in terms of denouncing art fixing, not stopping it, I mean, the well-intentioned people don't think they're doing anything wrong, so they won't look at the people calling it out as calling them out. And the people with bad intentions don't care if it's called out because they don't care that it's wrong. It also doesn't help that in communities like TikTok's, art fixing is basically a normalized, acceptable practice that a lot of people don't even bat an eye at. And there are most definitely communities on Twitter and other social media that share that mentality too. Even on YouTube, as I mentioned, channels like Ethan Becker, Sam Does Arts, and Colleen are all popularizing art fixing as a helpful and entertaining thing. And I'm not blaming them for that. Their viewers submit their art and consent to having it publicly fixed, and these creators aren't in the wrong for doing just that. But I do think that they're inadvertently popularizing art fixing as a normal thing to an audience that might be too young or uneducated to understand that it's only a normal, helpful thing when the artist whose work is being fixed asked for it to be. It's not their fault, but I do think it's having an impact, especially amongst younger demographics. Ultimately though, while looking into these reasons and situations has made me more understanding of art fixers, I still don't personally think there is any instance in which fixing someone's art is acceptable. And that's largely because I can't think of a single instance in which the art fixer's goal goal couldn't be achieved in a better way. If they're trying to get more representation in media, there are alternative ways to go about getting it that are more constructive and might actually affect positive change. If they're trying to help the artist fix technical mistakes in their work, they could help that artist more and without the risk of hurting them by reaching out to them privately and offering a direct critique if they're open to it. If they're trying to fight whitewashing or fat phobia or something similar in the artist's inaccurate depiction of a canon character, they could explain to the artist why their art was damaging and how to avoid making that mistake again. If they're trying to bully or harass an artist or attack a minority group, they could try being less of a fucking asshole. There are literally better alternatives to every reason you could possibly have to fix someone's art, and I don't think there's any excuse to choose art fixing instead. Honestly, to me, a lot of it also comes down to the word fixing. To claim that you fixed someone else's art is to claim empirically that there was something wrong with their art in the first place. And there's something so deeply pretentious and arrogant about asserting that you have the authority and ultimate skill required to make that judgment. And in so many cases, the problem lies exclusively with that word being used. If it weren't for the implication of something being wrong with the original art or character, a lot of the situations I brought up today would have been fine. Redesigning an existing character without claiming to have fixed the original, totally fine. Drawing fan art of a canonically non-black character as black without claiming to have fixed the original design of that character, so totally fine that there's a whole month dedicated to it. The mentality isn't toxic because of what they're changing. It's toxic because they're claiming it needed to be changed. I don't know. I guess I just think we need to be less concerned with what other artists are doing and more concerned with what we're doing. Like, in the time it took for this artist to fix the art of Genshin's Candace to be black, they could have drawn fan art of her as black, hurt no one, made something they love, and shared their version of representation that they wanted to see. In the time it took someone to fix another artist's work without their permission and post it online, they could have started offering actual paid art critiques to artists who wanted their input and would have found it helpful. So much effort is going into fixing art when there are a million better ways to go about whatever they're trying to achieve. And it's just disheartening, especially when they're actually well-intentioned, which I do think some of them are. I also think most of them are just assholes using the trend to spread hate and mock other artists. And in most cases, I see no reason to acknowledge them at all beyond denouncing what they're doing, blocking them, and moving on. Anyway, that's all for this video. What do you guys think? Is fixing someone else's art ever okay, assuming they haven't consented to it? Are there situations I didn't mention today that might put it in a different light? Why do you think it's still happening so often, despite the fact that it's being so regularly criticized and denounced? Let me know in the comments, because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, given how persistent and controversial of a problem it is. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members normal content. If you guys remember my video about Clip Studio Paint's subscription update, you'll know that my art news videos are just quick little rundowns of art-related situations that are ongoing, rather than video essays or analyses or anything. Less of me giving my take on it, more of a here's what's happening. None of me giving my take on it though. I mean, there's always a little bit of that. I have too many opinions, I'm sorry. That in mind, today I'm going to be going over the DeviantArt AI art generator situation, and why it is, for many artists, the final nail in the coffin for the platform as a whole. Basically, on Friday, DeviantArt announced that they would be launching an AI-powered text-to-image art generator called DreamUp, and already that infuriated a lot of people. AI art, as a whole, is a contentious topic that has pretty aggressively polarized and divided the art community, which means that a significant portion of their user base was already very against the medium altogether. So DeviantArt, a site that has long since claimed to be the most artist-friendly social media platform out there, thought it would be a good idea to try to sell its community on a tool that is threatening the entire art industry and filling the majority of it with anxiety and dread. And that's not the only great idea they had either. They also decided to train that AI generator on all of the art that was already on DeviantArt by default. If you're not familiar with how AI art works, I do have another video on it that I'll link in the iCard above, but basically the generator that DeviantArt is claiming as all their own genius new invention is actually an already well-established type of AI art generator called Stable Diffusion. The person, in this case DeviantArt, that's training the Stable Diffusion model provides it with a large sample of art and images for it to use to begin learning to associate those images with applicable relevant words, and then understand where individual pixels should be in relation to each other based on the way they're placed in the relevant images of the same category. And it doesn't just learn how to depict certain prompts accurately, it also learns to depict them in certain styles, because it associates certain pixel patterns with the art that it understands to have been made by certain artists. That's a gross oversimplification of how it really works, because my understanding of it in and of itself isn't all that great, and I'm sorry if I got anything wrong. But the part that's relevant to what's happening on DeviantArt is that the generator needs a huge library of work to train itself on in order to be functional, good, and accurate. The only thing setting DeviantArt's generator apart from others is that they used a different library of work to train it. More specifically, their own. That's right, DeviantArt trained its AI generator on all of the work that was already posted on the platform throughout the entirety of its history. That means that every artist who ever posted their work to DeviantArt is liable to have had it used by this generator as something to mimic and imitate. And they didn't have to give their permission or consent for that, because when they rolled out this fantastic new feature, they decided to make opting into it the default for every single individual work you've posted. Opting out of having your work used for this generation was something you had to do individually for every single piece of work in a very time-consuming and convoluted, unclear process. And while they have finally made it possible to opt in and out for your entire gallery at once now, this was only added as a feature after the massive backlash, and it still wasn't even advertised as an update. What was advertised, however, was the statement that DeviantArt posted after over 10 hours of artists frantically trying to save their work from being subjected to this generator, saying that they've heard our feedback and generously decided to label all of the art posted to the site as opt-out instead, meaning that you have to manually and explicitly decide to authorize your work for use in AI datasets. Which is good. It's exactly what the community wanted, although I think most of us would have preferred no AI datasets at all. But it is what we wanted. It's just that we wanted that from the start. It's too little too late, and that's for a couple of reasons. First and foremost is that the trust that DeviantArt had built amongst its community was completely demolished by this. Some artists spent hours panicking and trying desperately to protect their intellectual rights, and others didn't even know about the situation because they either hadn't heard or had long since left the platform, and had their work authorized automatically for use in AI datasets for hours because they didn't even know it was happening or that they needed to opt out to avoid it. And DA had hours and hours and hours to do something, especially given that they clearly were willing to reverse the opt-in default because they did so eventually. They chose not to for that long, and while they won't admit it, they chose to for a very specific reason, I think, and that is to get authorization to use as much of the art on their platform for AI training as they possibly could, drawing out the process of opting out so that they could take advantage of the hours worth of artists opting in automatically. This is purely speculation, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were always planning on reversing the opt-in default. I personally believe that it's more than likely that they anticipated the backlash and had always planned to respond to it by turning the default to opt-out eventually to appease the community, but wanted those hours worth of data collection first, because it was worth more to them as a pro than the backlash presented as a con. Again, though, that is just a theory. What isn't a theory is the second reason that them reversing this default opt-in is too little too late, and that's that their model is already trained. Opting out of having your art used in their AI's training only means it won't be used for further training. If it was posted to DeviantArt before you opted out, it's already been used to train the generator without your consent, and opting out can't untrain it. It can only stop it from being used for more training in the future. That means that artists have no say in the matter. They can't stop DeviantArt from training an AI to create art based on their work and styles because they already did it, and they're already planning on using that model anyway. And now they're graciously saying, oh, you know, sorry I broke into your house and robbed you, but you didn't say explicitly that I wasn't allowed to. But don't worry though, I'll generously assume that you no longer want to be robbed, even if you don't say so. So, you know, I won't do it again. Here's a graphic that explains it more clearly than my bitter ass analogy. Anyway, now on top of that, they're still claiming to be the heroic voice of the underdog artist here. See, Stable Diffusion models were already using huge libraries of copyrighted content that were scraped from various image hosting sites online, including DeviantArt, for training, without the consent of any of the artists who owned those images. But our good buddy DeviantArt says that they never consented to those models using those images, and that therefore they have our backs, and admit no wrongdoing when it comes to the fact that their users' art is in those datasets as a result. They're not mentioning that they used those existing libraries without those users' consent to train their existing model, rather than making a new one based on artists who did, in all awareness and understanding, choose to authorize the use of their work. They're denouncing the use of art being used without artist consent in AI datasets in the same breath as they're promoting their cool new thing made using art without artist consent. They're also saying that if an artist's specific style is used in the generation of a piece of AI art, it's completely fair, because that artist will be automatically credited by DreamUp as an influence, which is similar in vibes to saying, I reposted your art but I gave you credit so it's okay. Like, it's different, but it's not that different, and it's not a great look. And as of right now, that's pretty much the end of this story. DeviantArt seems to think that making opting out the new default will magically fix this problem, which is either just unbelievably dense and ignorant of them, or deliberately banking on artists not understanding the system and thinking that opting out actually removes their art from existing datasets rather than just future ones. So clearly they underestimate artists, which you'd think they'd know better than to do after this long supposedly advocating for us and basing a platform around us. But you would think they'd know better than to do a lot of things they just did, so who knows. Regardless, artists are still putting up a fight against this, and DA is facing no shortage of people telling them that this isn't enough and this doesn't fix it. Hell, their own copyright policy says that the following constitutes copyright infringement: placing someone else's work online without permission, using a creative work commercially without permission, adapting someone's creative work in one medium to another medium without permission, and modifying or editing a work without permission. And they're not acknowledging that based on that alone, based on their rules, they have openly infringed upon the intellectual rights of every artist on their platform. They're not acknowledging how many people have already been hurt by this, or even apologizing in any way for what they've done. Saying they've heard us is not the same as saying they're sorry and admitting wrongdoing in any meaningful way that suggests that change might come. It's their PR team desperately trying to sweep the mess they made under the rug as quickly as possible. And if I can help stop them from doing so with this video, even a little bit, I am sure as hell going to. To be clear, this update is being written on the evening of Saturday, November 12th, and is based only on the information that's been made available to me up until this point. If DeviantArt makes any kind of meaningful change after that point, please don't take this to mean that I'm disregarding or diminishing that. It just hasn't happened yet, and while I both hope that it does and will make an update on it if so, I don't foresee them making any change big enough to warrant that update. They clearly invested a lot of time and money into DreamUp, and I can't see them being willing to either scrap it now or start over on an entirely new model that will inevitably take years to develop and train, even if not doing either option means sacrificing the support of their entire community. They may, however, be open to legal action that might actually force their hand, even if they end up making changes exclusively as a result of that and not because they care. I think they've made their stance on caring pretty clear so far. That's just my thoughts though. I don't want to give too much of my own input here because this is just an update video, and I always believe that these platforms should be given the chance to respond to feedback and make positive change. DA hasn't yet, but it also hasn't been that long yet, and I do genuinely hope to see things take a turn for the better as things develop. But what do you guys think? Did this drive you away from DeviantArt as a platform, or are you gonna wait and see how things turn out? Do you think people are being too harsh on them over it? Let me know in the comments. And also let me know if these art news update videos are something you enjoy in addition to my regular content so that I can, make more. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed today's video. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, Lucian Izapa, and Abyss Reborn, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Shirome Artiste, Hey guys, it's Celestia, and no, I didn't clickbait you. I, a professional artist, am actually about to tell you why you shouldn't make art your job. That blatant hypocrisy is not lost on me. That said, I do have every intention of clarifying what I mean by that, because there's obviously a lot more nuance to the topic than art job bad, hobby art good. But before I do, let me take a moment to thank today's sponsor, XP Pen. XP Pen has generously provided this month's giveaway prize, their Artist 10 second generation drawing tablet, which they let me try out beforehand. And in doing so, I learned that this tablet is just way cooler than I've ever seen a tablet be. Possibly the coolest thing is that it's not a pen tablet or a pen display tablet, it's actually both. You can switch between modes depending on how you prefer to draw, which is a feature I've never seen before and was really impressed by. Another very cool aspect is that you don't just have to use it to draw, you can even connect a Switch to it for gaming if you want to play on a bigger screen but don't have a TV available. It has a 10.1-inch screen that's fully laminated with an anti-glare paper-like texture, which you guys know I love, and has 6 express keys, which you know I love more. Mine are programmed to zoom in and out, undo and redo, and switch between my eraser and pen, but they're really easy to reprogram to suit your own personal preferences too. It comes in 4 different colors. Mine is pink because I'm basic and it's one of my favorite colors. It has 0 pen lag and excellent calibration, and the pen uses XP Pen's new X3 chip technology, which means it's pretty much just all around better than older pen models that still use springs and have those super movable, wiggly nibs. There's honestly nothing about this tablet that I don't like, and they aren't paying me for this at all, so you'd better know that I mean it. You can enter to win this tablet by commenting "Don't touch my bread, government" on this video, in addition to your preferred method of contact if you win, and a winner will be drawn via random number generator on December 1st, 2022. Once drawn, I will either notify the winner by commenting back on their original comment or via the method they specified, and they will have 72 hours to respond before a new winner is drawn. Thank you so much to XP Pen for sponsoring this video and providing such an awesome prize, and I hope whoever wins it enjoys it just as much as I do. Now, all that aside, let's get into the video. Like I said, I am going to tell you why you shouldn't make art your job, but I want to get a few things out of the way right off the bat. These are just my opinions based on the very individual experiences that I've had, and will not be applicable to all types of art careers or even everyone pursuing the same kind of one that I have. A lot of the issues that prompted my opinions are very unique to the specific career path of a freelance illustrator and content creator, and other paths can be completely different. More specifically, animators and contract-based industry artists, while they have their own share of problems unique to those fields, probably won't face a lot of the problems that I'm going to talk about today. So with that in mind, if you're planning on pursuing those paths instead, making art your job might not be a bad plan, although I'd encourage you to do some research into the downfalls those artists face instead beforehand, because there's no shortage. Most of what I'll talk about today will only be relevant to those of you interested in freelance illustration and/or content creation as a career, and even then, I'm not telling you straight up that you shouldn't pursue that career. I'm saying there are a lot of aspects of it that I wish someone had warned me about before I decided to pursue it, and I want to be that person to tell as many of you as possible so that your decision is as informed as possible. I don't necessarily regret becoming a professional artist, but I do think that if I'd known everything I know now back when it was just my dream, I might have gone a different direction. So why should you not make art your job? Well, if you're anything like I was, because you probably have a handful of very inaccurate misconceptions about what that job will actually be like, and pursuing it anyway will give you some very harsh wake-up calls, probably one right after the other. Like when Dan Avidan said, life is a repeated, endless kick to the nuts, and when you think you've got the hang of it, life is like, hey, I got these new boots I'd like to try out on your nuts. And I am really making freelance illustration out to be the steamiest pile of shit right now. It's really not. There are just a lot of things about it that do suck, and they're things I wasn't prepared for, so I want you to be. That in mind, let's get into the biggest misconceptions about art as a job that I had, and what the reality of the situation actually is that might make that job less appealing. And the first one is the idea that being an artist professionally is just one job at all. I went into this thinking that this career would basically just end up being doing commissions for a living, or selling my existing art for a living. In reality, if you want to make enough to live on as a freelance artist without a day job, you need to be doing like 10 smaller jobs at once. Commissions alone won't pay for rent and bills unless you're getting $1 million or charging very, very high rates. And selling existing art, be it in galleries, in markets or stores, or on merch online, would probably only ever make you enough to live on if you were regularly selling fine art paintings for thousands of dollars, attending every possible art market in your area as a vendor, or you have a huge following that is regularly buying all of your merch. So to supplement that, you have to branch out even more and spread yourself out even thinner. Do commissions, sell at conventions and markets, sell merch online, start streaming your art, work for content creators who need art or assets, start making and selling brushes or textures for digital art programs, sell licenses to use your existing work as stock art, make paid classes or tutorials, teach art, find local stores and markets that will display and sell your stuff, and so on. It's a constant struggle to try to find more ways to make money from your art. All the while, people will shit all over you for trying to make money from your art. Like, you'll be sitting there trying to figure out how you can afford this box of craft dinner, and people will look you dead in the eye and say a real artist isn't in it for the money. But that's its own shit show of an issue. My point is that doing art for work as a freelancer isn't one job. It's a million small jobs that you hope you'll find enough of to break even that month. For example, my monthly income is made up of commissions, ad revenue from YouTube, sponsorships from YouTube, merch sales from my Etsy, art sales at conventions, local markets, and events, paid art critiques for Jing Sketch's art clinic, Patreon and Ko-fi, tattoo design sales, and soon the sale of tutorials and Procreate brushes, stamps, and textures. It's a lot, and it's incredibly overwhelming to manage. It is something that gets better with time though. Like, you start building a client base that's more stable and consistent, your business starts growing, and things don't stay quite that shitty forever. In that regard, it's no different than a lot of small businesses. But even when it gets better on the financial side and you're no longer a starving artist hoping to find enough work to pay the bills, the actual job side still usually means doing a million things at once, even if those things become easier to rely on and anticipate. And it's an incredibly chaotic, stressful, disorganized, exhausting way to live sometimes. Most times. To the point where I regularly look at people working 9-to-5 jobs and think, my god, their work ends when they go home at 5? My work doesn't even end when I'm in bed. It takes up a lot of time and effort, and it can be so difficult to separate your work life from your personal life, or even make any real time for the latter at all. I had to add 2 hours to all of my work days for a month in order to take one weekend off to go to the mountains with my mom, and that's something I do maybe once a year. That's not the case for everyone, especially for more well-adjusted people who aren't constantly obsessing over their work, but with this career, you do kind of have to sometimes if you want to advance it. The next misconception I had about making art my job was one that was pretty aggressively taught to me by the entirety of society, because the concept is a phrase that everyone's heard. If you do what you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I thought that because I loved making art as much as I did, I would love making it professionally just as much. And sometimes I do, but people don't talk nearly enough about the fact that other times, whether or not you love making art is heavily dependent on what you actually love about art. So if what you love about art is drawing your own ideas more than the actual process of drawing, spending the majority of your time drawing other people's ideas for money is probably going to make you miserable. If you do genuinely love the process just as much, you might have a great time with it. If what you love about art is the complete creative freedom to depict a subject however you want, working on a project with strict parameters that forces you to mimic someone else's style down to the letter is going to be a thoroughly joyless experience for you. And that's going to be the case for any job. I mean, even if you love some parts of it, there are going to be other parts that you hate and you have to do anyway, because that's life and it's unavoidable. But creative careers are often sold to us as the exception to that rule, which makes it all the more soul-crushingly disappointing to learn that they're not at all. And before you pursue one, I think it's unbelievably important to analyze exactly what it is you love about making art and how much of that you'll actually get to do by making it your job, and how much of the aspects you don't love you're willing to do anyway while still having that job be enjoyable to you. Because learning too late that an art job means spending 90% of your time doing something you derive no pleasure from is horrible, and having to keep doing it indefinitely is going to burn you out and kill your creativity faster than you can possibly anticipate. I was talking to a friend recently who basically said doing art for a living can be like licensing out your creativity to someone else for a price, and he wasn't wrong. It's so hard to maintain your love for art when you're doing that, and it's even harder to make sure you make enough time for your own personal art to avoid losing that love. The next misconception I had about art as a job kind of goes hand in hand with that, and it's that doing art professionally would mean pursuing my own creativity and ideas. That if I made art my job, it would mean bringing all of the concepts and ideas that I'd been developing over the years to life, because, I mean, I'd have the skills and the means to do so. And I do, now, have the skills and means to do so. What I don't have is the time to do so. So I went into this career path thinking that at the end of it, I would be able to make my manga, or my webcomic, or my video game, or my art books. And in reality, I'm making those things for other people. The majority of my time is spent making art for other people's comics and games and awesome ideas, and I have almost no time left after doing that for my own. I've been doing art as a job seriously for 6 years, and my art book still only has a few finished pieces ready for it. My manga is still nothing more than 2 notebooks worth of ideas and concepts dating back 10 goddamn years. My webcomic just has a logo and a character design and half a floor plan for the main setting. My video game has a rough map, a shitload of concept art, and a folder's worth of planning that still hasn't turned into any real production. Because with my current workload, I get about 1 full day a month to work on all of them. And the argument can absolutely be made that if I keep at this for a few more years and keep working to advance my career, I may eventually reach a point where I can afford to make more time for those projects and less time for the work that I do for other people. And that may very well be true, and I guess I'll have to find out and get back to you. But the point remains that getting to that point in your career takes a long time, and going into this field with the goal of doing it soon, or maybe at all, depending on whether or not you end up being able to stick it out, will probably result in some heartbreakingly severe disappointment. It did for me. I recently did an almost 3-hour-long deep dive into art school with a friend of mine named James, a former art student, which is linked in the iCard above. If you're interested in hearing both of us go over whether or not art school is valuable or worthwhile, go watch that. But the point that's relevant to this is that he and I spent the day together for that video, doing both the art school tour and the interview. And in the interim, we talked a lot about art and our experiences with it. And I won't go into too much detail because it's really not my place to share that detail, but essentially, after art school, he did pursue art professionally for a while, but then decided to stop because having to pour all of his time, effort, and most importantly, creativity into work for others just to make it as a professional artist was killing his creativity. And he had no time to make the things that he wanted or pursue his own ideas. And as soon as he stopped and chose a different career path, he was able to find his love for art again and revive his creativity. And now he actually has the spare time and resources to devote to the ideas that made him love it in the first place. Now when he has a cool art-based thing he wants to make, he can, and he can pour his full passion into it. And like, yes, the argument could be made that he has less time than he would probably like because of how much time he has to spend on his job, job. But like, if having an art-based job already doesn't allow you much, if any, spare time, is that really any worse? As far as I'm concerned, it's better. If an art job and a non-art job are both gonna limit the spare time that you have to devote to your passions and ideas, why not do the one that limits it less and also makes you less creatively drained? I don't know, honestly. It obviously depends on the person and the situation and whether or not the non-art job actually does leave them enough free time, and whether or not they find the art job creatively draining to begin with, and what their priorities are, and a million other things that it would take me 2 million years to list, so I won't. The point is that I can't make any definitive statement one way or the other as to whether or not a non-art job is better than an art job in terms of allowing you the time and freedom to pursue your art-based passions, but at least for me, I think I would rather have a non-art job and more time to make art for me if I could do it all over again. But I can't, and that's a hard pill to swallow at this point in my life. So if you can save yourself that pill by considering what matters to you in this regard sooner rather than later, I cannot encourage you to enough. So in conclusion, what am I saying here? Don't make art your job? Do make art your job? What? Well, just like when it came to discussing whether or not you should go to art school, I can't tell you that definitively. It depends on you and what you find important and valuable. But I do really, really want to warn you to take the decision seriously and think twice about making art your job, because it's not necessarily everything it's cut out to be a lot of the time. I've had both clients and friends with day jobs who have the disposable income and spare time to spend all of it growing and improving as artists and making everything they love. And I look at them with so much envy, because at least in my experience and that of many others I've heard from, that's not something that having an art job really allows for. I wish someone had warned me to look really goddamn closely at all of the possible downsides of an art career before pursuing one, because all I heard growing up was either don't do it, you'll be a starving artist, or doing what you love will make you endlessly happy. And I was okay with being poor because I was already poor, and happiness and art all the time sounded pretty damn good, so I went with it. And again, I'm not necessarily saying I regret going with it. I'm grateful to be where I am, to be able to make art my whole life. But I do think I would have done things differently if I'd known exactly what it was really like. And I want you guys to know before you make the same decisions I did, if those are decisions that you're considering. So that in mind, I guess what I'm saying is that above all else, you should evaluate what makes you love art, whether or not an art job would allow you to do those things to the fullest extent, and decide whether or not you would still enjoy that art job if it meant spending a lot of your time not doing those things. And if you would, make art your job. Get it, girl. If you wouldn't, though, pursue a different career path and make art your passion instead. You can always pursue your artistic ideas as potential jobs later on, but you'll at least have the time to get them to that point first. Like, my game, manga, or webcomic could all end up being primary aspects of my job, but I don't have the free time to develop them to that point. If having a different job allows you more time to develop yours to that point, you could always pursue them as jobs then instead, and in most cases you'll probably reach that point a lot faster. And if you do decide to make art your job, honestly, I think the only way to survive that while still maintaining your love for art is to make a very, very clear divide between your work art and your personal art, and fight tooth and nail to make sure you have at least some time for your personal work. At least that's how it is for me. I'm able to get through all of my work art because of that one day a month that I can devote to all of my personal projects, and the brief moments of downtime that I fill with art journaling or painting flowers or sketching things I love. Those moments, those hours, those days, like, those rejuvenate me as an artist. They refill my creativity, and they remind me why I love art and fought so hard to pursue it in the first place. And I'm constantly trying to make more time for those moments as a result. So long as you have that to bring you joy and love for what you do, and you separate it from the work that takes the joy and love away, I do believe that you can make it work in a way that fulfills you. But I did title this video, Don't Make Art Your Job, so let me end this off with a follow through to that clickbait. Don't make art your job if you can't handle criticism, micromanaging, or rejection, because applying to and working for both clients and companies will open you up to a lot of both. Don't make art your job if you don't have the devotion and willpower to stick out years of shitty, inconsistent pay that you can't count on and can barely live on, not to mention the feeling of failure associated with the idea that you're not, quote unquote, making it as an artist yet. Don't make art your job if you don't have the time and energy to devote spending your every waking minute working to advance both your craft and your career, because it will inevitably require you to, at least to some extent. And if you have a lot of obligations outside of work or a really active social life or something, you might not be able to commit to the necessary degree. Don't make art your job if you're either really disorganized or can't handle a really disorganized lifestyle, because freelancing means handling like 50 tasks at any given moment, and if you're flaky, easily overwhelmed, or prone to procrastination, it might not be something you're well suited to. Don't make art your job if having a very fluctuating, chaotic income is something you can't work with financially. financially, be it because it would stress you out, or because you have dependents or family that rely on you, or something else entirely. Don't make art your job if you aren't completely sure that you've prepared for what that means for you, or if you haven't thoroughly researched what it's like. And don't make art your job if you're not okay with putting your own art on hold to prioritize making money from art that you make for others. I guess just don't make art your job if you're not okay with making a lot of sacrifices to make it work for you. Because like anything that's worth it, you have to sacrifice a lot to get it. It's just important that you make sure it is worth it to you before you invest your life in it like I have. But that's all for me. I can't make the decision for you. All I can really do is encourage you to make it very, very carefully. Again, there are other types of art careers outside of freelance illustration and content creation that might work out better for you, but those also often require formal education, and again, also come with their own downsides that I haven't covered here in the slightest. If you're interested in hearing about those too, let me know, because I'm happy to interview some more guests and get back to you on that. But for now, I can only comment on the freelancer side of things. And on that side, I guess I just hope I've made at least someone think more carefully about whether or not it's right for them. Before I end this off though, I want to introduce you to a brand new segment of my videos, the fan art gallery. I know I've distanced myself from the community a lot over the past few months due to both harassment and my own fears and lack of free time, but the last thing I want is for you guys to feel unappreciated as a result, especially when you've taken the time to make fan art of Celestia. I mean, you guys don't see what happens behind the scenes, which is that I save every piece of fan art to print out and add to a big post-it board in my office that I regularly cry over. And I want to do something you do see, so I'm going to, with the fan art gallery. Once a month, or as often as applicable anyway, I'll showcase fan art from anyone who's drawn Celestia at the end of my video, so that everyone can see exactly how talented you guys are. I don't want to feature people who don't want to be featured, so I won't feature all of the pieces that I've seen already, but will instead include the ones that people have explicitly mentioned being okay with me including. That in mind, if you want your fan art shown in these segments, please mention me on social media or DM it to me alongside your consent for it to be included. And this applies to existing fan art too, not just new stuff. If you drew Celestia months ago and are hearing this now and want it to be included, just let me know in the same way and I'll make sure that it is. There's no time limit. I want to thank all of you guys as much as I can for the art that you spend your time and effort making for me, and I want you to feel as appreciated as you are. So look forward to that now and in the future. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and please leave a like and subscribe if you did. Special thank you as always to channel members Cafe Soleil, Joseph Solomon, Unknown Code, Abyss Reborn, and Lucian Izapa, as well as patrons Batman, Kyle Lowe, Blue Swanson, This Is Totally My Name, Unity, Cora Fear, Jamisha Walker, Shirome Artiste, Elenkshi, Soul Crystal, and Kim Yin for their support, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey guys, it's Celestia, and today's topic is one that's been a briefly discussed point of contention in quite a few of my past videos now, as well as the art community as a whole, and it's the separation of art from artist. The issue usually arises in times of controversy. When an artist does something bad, does it then make you bad for enjoying their art? Should you be able to enjoy an artist's work separately from them and what they've done? Or should their art be shunned even when it itself is not problematic, because of something the artist has done? Is it even possible to thoroughly separate an artist from their art, regardless of whether or not we should? I can't promise you any definitive answers to those questions, but I will at least be going over some of the more thought-provoking, often very opposing opinions on the topic and why people believe them throughout today's video. Also, since a lot of you being unable to skip to a timestamp without demanding to speak to my manager in the comments is a recurring problem at this point, I'm going to be saving this month's contest update until the end of the video, but XP Pen is sponsoring August's contest and providing 2 prizes this month, so I would encourage you to stick around and watch this section at the end, because the first place winner will get an XP Pen Deco MW drawing tablet, and the second place winner will get an XP Pen Deco Fun XS drawing tablet. So you have double the chance to win this month if you listen to the outro and learn how to enter. Now, in terms of the topic itself, there's a lot to unpack, and that's partially because the entire issue of whether or not we should, or even can, separate the art from the artist is one that's been discussed for hundreds of years. And while no one has ever been able to determine a concrete answer throughout all of that time, it has nonetheless yielded some very well-rounded and educated stances on every side. Unfortunately, while it used to be a topic that was debated by scholars in relatively good faith, it has now largely become sensationalized, over-dramatized Twitter fodder, wielded by the art community as a weapon with which to promote cancel culture. The entire issue has become one of two things, depending on which side of it you're on. A way for you to justify supporting artists who have done horrible things and absolve yourself from any moral blame for doing so. Or a way to over-police the morality of art and attack others for liking something that you don't think they should. As with most things these days, it's become more of an issue of extremism than anything else. People are viewing this as black and white with one objective answer, when the entire problem is based in the grays of nuance and situational context, and neither are being considered. So my goal here is to share all of the biggest and most common black and white takes, all of the gray nuance prompting them, and some thoroughly opinion-based conclusions from me, based on both. To do so, I'll be splitting this video into 4 sections. Why people think we should separate art from artist, why people think we shouldn't separate art from artist, whether or not we even can one way or the other, and my final thoughts about it all. Before I do though, there's some context that I'd like to elaborate upon, specifically pertaining to the origin of that separation. I asked those of you who follow me on Twitter for your opinions on this issue before I scripted the video, and there are quite a few opinions you gave on it that I will reference throughout it. But there's one person in particular who provided a specific perspective that I had not considered at all beforehand via DMs, the historical one. Misu2002 sent me a really helpful article that I'll be referencing throughout this analysis, which is also linked in the description, and it explains, amongst a litany of other super helpful and insightful points, how this whole issue started. Because in the beginning, this wasn't about whether or not it was morally okay to like the art of an asshole artist. It was about evaluating the art itself, which to some extent is a perspective that I believe should still be maintained. The whole practice began in the early 20th century when new criticism, capitalized for those of you who can't see my script, which is all of you, was developed as one of the major critical tools of art, mostly literary art, in its time period. The intention behind the development of new criticism was to elevate the evaluation and appreciation of art to a science. And to do so, they posited a method of evaluation based on whether or not art had value on its own, independent from its creator. And I don't just mean that they were like, I don't care who made this, I'm gonna judge it based on its own merit. I mean that they looked at it and thought, if I can sense any semblance of the artist's identity in this work, the artist has failed. It is only truly good if I can't tell who made it. They didn't just want to separate art from artists, they wanted the art to stand on its own. They didn't want people saying, it's good because Picasso made it. They wanted people to say, this is good, and then learn that Picasso made it. Of course, there are significant differences in that capacity, because Picasso's style would lead one to recognize his work just by looking at it, putting him at a significant disadvantage if held to that criteria, which subsequently illustrates a prime example of how this does not equally or seamlessly translate to visual art, but it is nonetheless how the whole thing started. To my understanding, the first recorded debate surrounding the separation of art from artist was prompted by new criticism. And while I realize that its correlation to visual art is not as straightforward as its intended purpose of evaluating written art, I still think it's worth mentioning. Because this whole thing started with critics wanting to appreciate art based on its merit alone, as I understand it, which is the complete opposite reason of why we're trying to separate it now. Not because the artist was being criticized and subsequently dealing with their completely unrelated work being demonized as a result, but because the artist was being praised and their work was therefore being commended despite the fact that if it weren't known as being theirs, it might not be nearly as impressive. Which I actually find really fascinating, because it shows that the separation of art from artist is more complex than just morality. It's about the viewer's perception and interpretation too. Nonetheless, new criticism is not the only way that art is held to separate scrutiny from its creator, and it is also, in my opinion, the worst extreme compared to its counterpart, postmodernist beliefs, primarily those coined by Barthes. I find Barthes' beliefs to be much more reasonable, simply because I do not believe in black and white viewpoints to any objective or quantitative degree, but that does not matter at all because I haven't explained it yet. Basically, postmodernists do also believe, just like new critics, that art should be separate from artist, but they believe it for different reasons. Roland Barthes, in 1967, argued that the artist's intention in making a piece of art is entirely irrelevant. The only thing that actually matters, to him, is how the viewer interprets that art. For example, consider a piece of abstract art. The artist makes a piece depicting a black square on a white background. They intend it to depict their experience with social isolation during the 2020 health experience. Thanks, YouTube. One viewer sees it and understands it as a depiction of their distance from other people throughout their life, resulting from bullying and mental illness. Another viewer sees it as a depiction of their experience as a minority. Another viewer sees it as a depiction of being forced into a cookie-cutter version of themselves for society. Another viewer sees it as nothing more than a visual contrast between extremes. Based on Bart's method of evaluation, all of those viewers are correct, and the artist's own views are irrelevant, because the person looking at the art is the one who creates its meaning. As he said, there is no specific meaning, there is no truth, there is nothing to understand. The role of the reader and the role of the text are as co-creators of meaning. I bring all of this context up because, in my opinion, it's relevant when considering the role of the artist in their art in any situation. Yes, this context pertains specifically to a more analytical, scholarly perspective on the matter, being that it's about evaluating the art's merit, not its morality. But I don't think the method by which they're evaluated is entirely irrelevant here. It's clear that historically, the role of the artist in their art has always been hotly debated, with no objectively accepted consensus. And even in the context of the article I'm referencing, no agreement was reached. The writer consulted 3 separate literary critics, and none of them could wholeheartedly agree on the extent to which an artist could be separated from their work. All said that they drew from both New Criticism and Postmodernism when constructing their views on the issue, but they also said that they didn't think it was necessary or pertinent to draw a divisive line between art and artist. So if these practiced professional scholars couldn't agree on any consistent stance on the matter, how are we supposed to? Especially when it's grown to encompass much larger, wider-reaching issues as a result of cancel culture. We're not. We don't know Welcome to the video. That's right, this was just the fucking intro. We haven't even started to dive into how this impacts the modern art community yet. But don't worry, I'm about to tell you why your problematic artist fave is totally within their rights to keep making money from their art that's being supported by millions. Or why they're not. I need a fucking vacation. All relevant context in mind, let's start here. Why do people think that art should be judged and appreciated separately from its artist? There are a lot of different reasons, which is going to be a recurring theme in this video, but I'll try to summarize